Now, friends, let me ask you this. Wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to deal with difficult people? I mean, for example, wouldn't it be great if all the nasty neighbors had to live in one part of town, like they all had to live on the outskirts of the town together? Or wouldn't it be great if all the crazy and aggressive drivers weren't allowed to drive anymore, like you just revoked their licenses, they couldn't drive? Or wouldn't it be great if the people that talk on their cell phones, on speakerphone loudly in the middle of a store, wouldn't it be great if they were banned from those stores? Or how about this one? Wouldn't it be great if you could go a whole day without having to get a single call from a scammer? Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to deal with difficult people? You remember the prophet Jonah? Remember God told him to go to Nineveh and tell these crazy and obnoxious and difficult people to stop doing terrible things? Remember, Jonah didn't want to do that. He ran in the opposite direction. But God eventually got him to Nineveh, and when he's standing there, he stands up in front of all these, obnoxious, difficult people, and he says, hey guys, you got to stop doing all these terrible things, or the Lord's going to come and he's going to destroy your city. And you remember, the Ninevites listened. Right? They repented of their sin, and God had compassion on them and did not destroy them and their city. Now, you would think that would be the end of the story. But it's not, because Jonah was angry, and Jonah was frustrated. God said, Jonah, what's your problem? And he said, oh, God, you shouldn't have had compassion on all these crazy and obnoxious and difficult people. I mean, God, come on, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to deal with them anymore? You remember how he responded to Jonah? Take a look. He said, should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there were more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left? Jonah, should I not have concern for the people of Nineveh? You see, God gives us a really good question to stew on today. And the question is this: should we be concerned for the people in our city? In other words, should we care about the people in our neighborhoods, including the crazy and obnoxious and difficult people? This is a question that God asked Jonah thousands of years ago, but it was a question that people were even asking in Jesus' time. You remember there was this one scene in Luke chapter 10 where there's this teacher of the law. He stands up and he says, hey, Jesus, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus says, well, what does the law say? And he says, well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, you've answered correctly. Go and do likewise. And you would think that would be the end of the story. But it wasn't, because the man had a clarifying question. You remember this question? He said, hey, Jesus, who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? In other words, who are the people that I have to love in the same way that I would love myself? You can imagine this man thinking through, like, okay, Jesus, by neighbor, you mean like my family, my friends, the nice little lady next door? I mean, those are the people that I need to love, right? You're not talking about the obnoxious people. You're not talking about the crazy people. You're not talking about the difficult people. I mean, Jesus, I don't have to love the person that cuts me off in traffic, right? I don't have to love the coworker who gets under my skin, right? I don't have to love the neighbor who dumps all his trash into our dumpster, right? I mean, Jesus, who exactly is my neighbor? You remember how Jesus responds in this? He tells the parable of the Good Samaritan. Remember, a man's walking down the road, he gets robbed and beaten, he's left for dead, and a priest walks by, sees him, and does nothing. And then a Levite walks by, he sees him, and he also does nothing. And then finally a Samaritan comes and sees him and goes above and beyond to help this man in his time of need. And so in response to this question by this guy, hey, Jesus, who is my neighbor? Jesus' parable tells us that a neighbor is anybody who gets our attention. In other words, a neighbor is somebody who is in need, which when you think about it, well, that means that a neighbor could be anybody. And if a neighbor could be anybody, then who is our neighbor? It's everybody. It's everybody. And friends, this has huge implications for you and I today, because when we live in a city or when we live in a place with a whole lot of people, we're not just called to love the people we want to love, but we're also called to love the people we don't want to love. In other words, we're called to be like the Samaritan and not like the priest or the Levite.